Hello, welcome to Baltic World, the premier channel for news and international affairs affecting Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Crispin, and today I'm going to give an update on the Baltic migration crisis with the Belarusian border. During 2020, only 81 migrants crossed that border for the entire year. Over the past couple of months, that number has ballooned to 4,500. Why? Because Lukashenko has been importing plane loads of migrants from Turkey and other places, dumping them on the EU border with Lithuania and flooding them with a new migrant wave in order to extract concessions over the sanctions that are being increasingly placed on his regime. In response, Lithuania has constructed a new border wall with the belief that it will be finished with Polish and other help by April. And so far, over 2,500 migrants have been pushed back into Belarus due to increased coordination with border guards across different jurisdictions and being able to ensure that they stay on the Belarusian side of the border. First of all, let's be clear. These are not refugees and asylum seekers. People are not going to refugee camps where the UNHCR has deemed people to be refugees and brought them into the EU for a better life. No, this is economic waves of migrations, potentially many of them a security threat to the European Union, many dumping their documents as soon as they arrive in Belarus, being deliberately picked up by the Lukashenko regime with coordination from Russia in order to increase and maintain this crisis. This plays into a serious division within the European Union. So this wave of migrants, yes, by Lukashenko, is about extracting concessions over sanctions, but it actually exploits major divisions within the European Union itself. We all remember Angela Merkel in 2014 announcing that everyone from Syria was welcome to come into the European Union. That led to over 1 million migrants from not just Syria, but other places as well. People crossing the Mediterranean and arriving in Greek islands off the coast of Italy, and a huge increase in the amount of Islamic motivated terrorism affecting European countries as a whole, in Germany, in the UK, and certainly in France. Lithuania is a small country. It has fewer than 3 million people, so thousands of migrants arriving in Lithuania is a really significant burden for them to handle on their own. At the moment, it seems like the Poles and to a lesser degree the Germans are pitching in to help, but nevertheless, this has serious dangers for Lithuania. Not only that, Belarus's border is really close to the capital of Vilnius. I think it's only like 18-40 kilometers away, and so the migrants will flood right into the Lithuanian capital. It's not like they're being set up in special camps along the border. This is, immediately impacts major urban areas. The divisions within Europe, though, are quite grave. You've had this absolutely catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, strategically correct but terribly executed, in which many Afghans have lost their lives. In fact, American personnel have lost their lives, and renewed calls for tens of thousands of migrants to be welcomed into the European Union from Afghanistan for those that are fleeing the Taliban. With that political wave, the pressure being placed upon European countries to accept foreign migrants is increasing, thus complicating Lithuania's efforts and those of the other Baltic states to be able to say no to new migrants and to push them back across the Belarusian border. This isn't just affecting Lithuania. The Latvians and the Estonians have noticed an increase as well, mostly from people going north from the Lithuanian border up to those other countries. And so Lukashenko is really exploiting this weakness. It will also mean that there'll be an increased fortification of the Lithuanian border, potentially an increased militarization of the Lithuanian border. I know that months ago the Belarusian government did an emergency sort of mobilization of armed forces because they perceived a foreign threat, which of course was absolutely ridiculous. There's also increases the security concerns around the Astravaites nuclear power plant. It's right there on the Lithuanian border. What happens if you've got floods of migrants, thousands upon thousands, around what is a potentially a securely compromised facility? This is a potential flashpoint of Europe. But also, domestically within Europe, there is a major political divide. There are those that think that the waves of migrants are something that the Europeans should welcome with open arms. Many Europeans see borders themselves as antithetical to the entire European project, and thus, preventing people from the Middle East who may in fact be fleeing persecution, or at least that being their presupposition, is morally repugnant. And a lot of different countries have in particular come down on the Hungarian government for not accepting what they perceive as their share of migrants. Same thing with Poland. And indeed, I think it was the Swedish government or one of the major political parties even called for the potential expulsion of countries like Poland over issues to do with accepting migrants. So this migrant wave, it has an economic burden on Lithuania. It creates potential security problems for the rest of the European Union, but also precipitates potentially a political crisis where you've got some governments that are ardently in favour of extending every possible consideration to these waves of asylum seekers or migrants, whereas others wish to secure their borders, preserve their national sovereignty, and ensure that only those who enter their country have been properly vetted as appropriate refugees. This division has been a fixture of European politics, particularly since 2014 during the initial Syrian wave crisis, but is only intensifying as we see the lack of integration of these foreign kind of new enclaves into the traditional cultures that are in their European region. If you're a country that has many tens of millions of people, like France or Germany or the UK, they can absorb larger numbers of migrants, even though it has created a significant degree of social dislocation. For example, in London, of course, the largest city in the United Kingdom, the capital of Britain, well, it is now a majority non-English city. The whole Cockney accent of East London has been expelled from that traditional area, and now they're in, I think, Birmingham or something, and then by 2030 that entire subculture of Britain will have died out. Now, if we transpose that to the Baltic states, where you've got kind of fewer than 10 million people across the entire Baltic, how many migrants are realistic for them to absorb and process? The Poles have introduced new legislation, I think also the Lithuanians are as well, to extend the period of time that people can be held in detention. So at the moment, the maximum period of time migrants can be held in detention, I think, is 6 months, after which they must be released. Well, if they do that, then thousands of migrants being pushed across the border by the Belarusians could flood the local Baltic kind of economies, states, be a huge burden on their social and welfare systems, complete and significant barriers in culture and language and education. How are they going to integrate into communities and societies with such small populations who are trying to preserve their national culture? I also think of Sweden again in particular. The difference in immigration policy between Sweden and Finland is quite stark. So Sweden and Finland, there aren't many countries as similar in terms of their culture and background as those two countries are. Perhaps Australia and New Zealand would be similar. And yet their immigration policies have been wildly different. So Finland has, because they have fought many wars of independence, they have secured their borders against Russia and Soviet invasion. They're a bit more nationalistic. They're a bit more prideful in protecting their Nordic traditions and culture and identity. So they are much more restrictive in terms of foreign people migrating to Finland because Finland is a small population and therefore relatively small numbers of migrants could significantly kind of blend and curtail their natural culture. Whereas Sweden has been far more open and cosmopolitan and Eurocentric, with its social democracy and its kind of cosmopolitan worldview, that they have been far more welcoming of refugees and other migrants. And, this is just my opinion, but I feel like Sweden has significantly changed from what it was 30 or 40 years ago in terms of its ethnic and makeup, and also its social problems. They have significantly higher rates of crime and violence and physical threats and sexual malevolence and all this sort of stuff as a consequence of people with very different value systems and worldviews living side by side, and with the Swedish government being very reluctant to crack down on things that are obviously from certain groups because of a perception of racial bias or cultural misunderstanding or anything like that, because the Swedes are humanitarian, good people. They don't want to be perceived as doing something prejudicial to certain minority groups. So this is less of a problem in countries with massive populations and huge amounts of resources. But if you're talking very small countries, this migrant wave is a serious threat. It's an invasion of their territory and their culture. And thus, I fully support the Baltic states seeking to secure their borders against Belarus. I will continue to cover this story as things unfold. It's not entirely clear where this ends. Hopefully, as they project, the wall will be finished by April, and that the European community as a whole can solve the political deadlock that is presently facing the issue of migrants, and rally behind the need to protect the Baltic states and Poland to be able to control their own borders and their own influx of refugees. That's my view. Please leave your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them. Obviously, it's a very contentious issue, so please be respectful, be mindful of YouTube's community guidelines, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.